The stars around station had always been quiet. For 15 years, humanity had built and grown in this corner of space. Families lived here. Children went to school here. Scientists studied the mysteries of the universe here. It was supposed to be safe. But on this day, the stars were full of fire. Admiral Laura stood in the command center of station and watched her fleet die. The holographic display in front of her showed everything in terrible detail. Blue dots represented human ships. Red dots represented the enemy. There were so many red dots that they looked like a swarm of angry insects surrounding a wounded animal. The Dominion had come without warning. 217 warships had appeared at the edge of the system just 4 hours ago. They moved with perfect coordination, like a single creature with 200 bodies. Their weapons fired in synchronized waves that human shields could not handle. Laura had 43 ships to defend the station, 43 against 217. The math was simple and brutal. "Admiral, we've lost the Constellation," a young officer reported. His voice shook as he spoke. "The Pacific is reporting critical damage. They're requesting permission to retreat." Laura closed her eyes for just a moment. The Constellation had carried 300 crew members, 300 people who had trusted her to keep them safe. She opened her eyes again and kept her voice steady. "Permission granted. Tell all damaged ships to fall back to the station's defensive perimeter." She watched as more blue dots flickered and disappeared from the display. Each one was a ship. Each ship was full of people, sons and daughters, mothers and fathers, friends and lovers, all gone in the flash of alien weapons. They were not here to negotiate. They were not here to talk. They had sent no messages, made no demands. They had simply arrived and started killing. Laura had studied them for years. She knew what they wanted. They wanted humanity gone. They wanted this sector of space for themselves. And they were very good at getting what they wanted. The Dominion had conquered 12 other species before turning their attention to humans. None of those species existed anymore. Their worlds were empty now, stripped of resources and life. They did not believe in sharing the universe with anyone. "Admiral," another officer called out, "the enemy flagship is moving forward. They're positioning for a direct assault on the station." Laura looked at the massive red dot at the center of the enemy formation. The flagship was a dreadnought called the Voice of Conquest. It was 3 kilometers long and carried enough firepower to crack a planet. If it reached optimal firing range, station would not survive. She had no ships left that could stop it. Her fleet was being torn apart piece by piece. In another hour, maybe less, it would all be over. "Keep fighting," she said to her officers. "Make them pay for every meter they take." It was all she could do. It was not enough. She knew it was not enough, but she would not surrender. Humans did not surrender to those who came to destroy them. Far from the main battle, a ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel. It was small compared to the giants fighting near the station. Just a destroyer, barely 200 meters long, with scorch marks on its hull from a recent fight. The USS Horizon had seen better days. Captain Danny Vance stood on his bridge and stared at the tactical display. His stomach turned cold as he processed what he was seeing. He had expected a battle. He had not expected a massacre. "My God," Lieutenant Commander Monroe said beside him. She was his first officer and had served with him for 6 years. He had never heard her sound so shaken. "Danny, they're everywhere." Danny counted the enemy ships on the display. Then he counted again, hoping he had made a mistake. He had not. He said into the ship's communication system, "How are our engines?" Chief Engineer Cole's voice came back immediately. "We got them working again, Captain, but they're held together with hope and prayer right now. I wouldn't push them too hard." Danny almost laughed. They had just spent 18 hours fixing damage from a skirmish with scouts. His crew had not slept. His ship was hurt. And now he was looking at a battle that made their previous fight look like a minor disagreement. Captain Ensign Tyler Grant said from the weapons station. He was young, barely 22 years old, with wide eyes that showed his fear. What do we do? Danny looked at his young officer. Tyler had joined the Horizon 3 months ago, fresh from the academy. This was supposed to be a quiet posting, a chance to learn the basics before seeing real combat. The universe had other plans. We do our job, Danny said. He made his voice calm and confident even though his heart was pounding. We're going to help our people. Stepped closer to him and lowered her voice. Danny, look at those numbers. If we join the main fleet, we'll be destroyed in minutes. Standard tactics won't work here. I know, Danny said. So what's the plan? Danny stared at the display for a long moment. He watched the ships move in their perfect patterns. He watched them pick apart human vessels one by one. They were efficient. They were coordinated. They were predictable. And that was their weakness. They had studied human warfare for decades. They knew how humans fought. They knew that humans protected each other, fell back when outnumbered, and prioritized survival. Every tactic they used was designed to counter standard human behavior. Danny had never been very good at standard behavior. Get me Admiral on a secure channel, he said, and pull up everything we have on Protocol Wildfire. His eyes went wide. Danny, that was never approved. The Admiralty said it was too dangerous. The Admiralty isn't here, Danny replied. We are. He looked out the viewport at the distant flashes of battle. Somewhere in that chaos, thousands of people were fighting and dying. Somewhere in that chaos, Station was waiting to be destroyed. One small ship against an empire. The odds were impossible. The situation was hopeless. Any reasonable person would run away. Danny had never been a very reasonable person. Set a course for the center of the enemy fleet, he ordered. Maximum speed. His crew stared at him, but they obeyed. They always did. The horizon burned toward the battle, and Danny began to plan the craziest thing he had ever done. Admiral Laura was not a woman who surprised easily. She had commanded fleets in 3 different wars. She had faced pirates, rebels, and hostile aliens. She thought she had seen everything. Then she received a message from the horizon, and for the first time in 20 years, she had no idea what to say. Captain Vance, repeat your last transmission, she said. I must have heard you wrong. Danny's voice came through the speakers, calm and clear despite the chaos around them. You heard me right, Admiral. I'm taking my ship into the center of their formation. I'm going to break them apart from the inside. Laura stared at the tactical display. She watched the tiny blue dot of the horizon moving away from the human fleet, heading straight toward the massive cluster of red dots. That's suicide, she said. You'll be destroyed before you get anywhere close. Maybe, Danny admitted. But if I do nothing, everyone dies anyway. At least this way there's a chance. Laura wanted to order him to stop. She wanted to tell him to fall back and join the defensive line. But she looked at her fleet again. She counted the ships she had lost. She calculated how long they could hold out. Not long enough, not nearly long enough. What do you need from me? She asked. Just give me 5 minutes, Danny said. When you see the opening, hit them with everything you have left. The channel went silent. Laura watched the horizon accelerate toward certain death, and she said a quiet prayer for the crazy fool commanding it. On the bridge of the horizon, Danny stood at the center of controlled chaos. Alarms beeped. Officers shouted reports. The ship shook as enemy weapons fire passed dangerously close. Monroe worked at her console with fierce concentration. I've loaded Protocol Wildfire into the system. But Danny, the simulations showed a 30% chance of destroying our own reactor. Then we've got a 70% chance of not destroying it, Danny replied. I like those odds. I don't think you understand how odds work. Danny grinned at her. It was not a happy grin. It was the grin of a man who had accepted that he might die and decided to make his death mean something. Tyler, he called to his weapons officer, are the missiles ready? Tyler Grant looked up from his station. His face was pale, but his hands were steady on the controls. All 48 missiles are loaded and programmed with the spiral pattern, ready to fire on your command, Captain. Good man. Down in the engine room, Cole was having a conversation with his ship. It was not a polite conversation. Come on, you beautiful disaster, he muttered as he adjusted power feeds. Just hold together a little longer. I know I'm asking too much. I know you're tired, but we need you. So please, please don't explode. The engines groaned in response, chose to interpret that as agreement. Captain, he reported through the comm system, I can give you full power for about 3 minutes. After that, I make no promises. 3 minutes is all I need, Danny replied. The horizon dove into the enemy formation. Ships turned to face this unexpected threat. They were confused. Their commanders exchanged rapid communications, trying to understand what was happening. This was not normal human behavior. Humans did not charge into superior numbers. Humans did not seek death. Something was wrong, but they could not figure out what. Their confusion cost them precious seconds. Danny watched the distance counter tick down. 5,000 meters, 4,000, 3,000. Tyler, fire missiles on my mark. Yes, sir. 2,000 meters. The ships finally opened fire. The horizon's shields flared and sparked as they absorbed hit after hit. Shields at 60%, reported. 50%, 40. Danny did not blink. Prepare the pulse. She entered the commands with shaking fingers. What they were about to do had never been tested in real combat. The pulse would overload their own systems just as badly as it would overload the enemy. But it would hit the nearby ships harder because they were not expecting it. At least that was the theory. 1,000 meters, Tyler called out. Fire missiles, Danny ordered. Tyler pressed the button. 48 missiles launched from the horizon in a spiraling pattern that looked almost beautiful. They spread out in expanding circles, each one targeting a different enemy ship, each one moving in a way that made them nearly impossible to track. The point defense systems tried to shoot them down. They were designed to handle missiles that flew in straight lines. They were not designed for this. Most of them missed. Explosions bloomed across the formation. Ships staggered and burned. But Danny knew it was not enough. He needed to do more damage. He needed to create real chaos. And now, activated Protocol Wildfire. The Horizon's reactor surged to maximum output. For one terrible second, the ship seemed to hold its breath. Then it released everything. The electromagnetic pulse expanded outward in an invisible wave of destruction. It passed through shields like they were not there. It scrambled computers and fried circuits. It turned sophisticated weapons systems into expensive paperweights. 17 ships went dark instantly. Their engines died. Their weapons stopped firing. They drifted through space like dead whales. Inside the horizon, the lights went out. The hum of the engines faded to silence. For a moment, there was only darkness and the sound of people breathing. Then emergency power kicked in. Red lights flickered on throughout the ship. Danny grabbed the edge of his command chair to stay standing. Report, he called out. We're alive, said, her voice filled with amazement. Weapons are offline, shields are offline, but we're alive. Cole's voice came through the speakers, slightly hysterical. The reactor is still working. I don't know how, but it's still working. Someone up there likes us. Danny looked at the tactical display. It was running on backup power, showing a view of the battlefield. He could see the gap they had created in the enemy formation. He could see the confused movements of ships as they tried to respond to this unprecedented attack. But he also saw something else. The remaining ships were turning toward the horizon, over 100 of them, and his ship could not run, could not fight, could not even raise shields. Well, Danny said quietly, we got their attention. Tyler looked at him with fear in his eyes. "Captain, what do we do now?" Danny stared at the enemy fleet closing in around them. He had one card left to play, one desperate shot that might save them or might mean nothing at all. He pointed at the display. "Tyler, do you see the flagship, the big one at the center?" "Yes, sir. We have one that might still work. I need you to hit their communication array, not their weapons, not their engines, their communication array." "Understood immediately. If we take out their communications, they can't coordinate. They'll fall apart." "That's the idea," Danny agreed. Tyler's hands moved to his controls. There was an old weapon, simple and reliable. It did not need computers to aim. It just needed a steady hand and a good eye. Tyler had both. "I have the shot," he said. His voice was no longer shaking. "Firing now." A single metal slug accelerated to incredible speed and crossed the distance in a heartbeat. It struck the flagship's communication tower and tore it apart in a shower of sparks and debris. The voice of conquest went silent, and the fleet, for the first time in their history, did not know what to do next. The Dominion had built an empire on one simple principle: perfect obedience. Every ship followed orders from above. Every captain waited for commands. Every decision flowed down from the top like water from a mountain. This system had conquered 12 civilizations. It had never failed. Until now. On the bridge of the voice of conquest, Supreme Commander stood in stunned silence. The holographic display in front of him showed static. The communication systems that connected him to his fleet were dead. For the first time in his long military career, he could not speak to his own ships. "Get those systems back online," he roared at his officers. "Now." His crew scrambled to obey, but the damage was severe. The human weapon had been incredibly precise. It had not tried to destroy the flagship. It had simply cut out its tongue. Watched through the viewport as his fleet began to come apart. Without orders, individual captains did not know what to do. Some continued attacking the human fleet, following their last commands. Others turned to pursue the crippled human ship that had caused this disaster. A few began to retreat, assuming the silence meant the flagship had been destroyed. And in the chaos of conflicting movements, accidents began to happen. Two cruisers, both trying to target the horizon, crossed into each other's firing lines. Their weapons struck each other instead of their intended target. One ship lost its shields. The other lost an engine. Neither had been given permission to fire on friendly vessels, so neither knew how to respond. More collisions followed, more friendly fire incidents. The perfect formation that had dominated the battle dissolved into a swirling mess of confused ships. On the horizon, Danny Vance watched it happen and allowed himself a small smile. "It worked," Monroe breathed. "I can't believe it worked." "Don't celebrate yet," Danny warned. "We're still dead in space and some of them are still coming for us." He was right. At least 30 ships had locked onto the horizon and were closing in. They did not need orders from the flagship to destroy the enemy that had humiliated them. They wanted revenge. Danny called to his engineer. "Tell me you have something." Cole's voice was strained. "I'm trying, Captain. The pulse fried half our systems. I'm literally rewiring the ship by hand down here." "How long?" "I don't know, 10 minutes, 20. They did not have 10 minutes. The closest ship was less than 2 minutes away. Danny looked at his crew. They were tired. They were scared. But they were not giving up. Tyler Grant sat at his weapons console, trying to bring any other guns online. Monroe coordinated damage control teams throughout the ship. Even the junior officers were working frantically, doing whatever they could. This was why Danny loved serving on human ships. When everything went wrong, humans did not wait for orders. They just started fixing things. "Tyler, what weapons do we have?" The young officer checked his console. "The is empty, sir. It takes 10 minutes to reload manually. We have 2-point defense cannons that might work, that's it. 2 small guns against 30 warships. It was not much, but it was something. Use them to shoot down any missiles or fighters that get close, Danny ordered. Buy us time. Tyler nodded and went to work. The first fighter swept in toward the horizon, weapons blazing. Tyler tracked it with his console and fired. The small cannon spat out a stream of projectiles that tore the fighter apart. Another fighter came, then another. Tyler destroyed them both. But the larger ships were getting closer, and point defense cannons could not stop warships. Moved to stand beside Danny. We did good, she said quietly. Whatever happens next, we did good. Danny nodded. He thought about his crew, about the people who had trusted him to lead them, about the families they would never see again if they died here. Then something changed on the tactical display. The human fleet was moving. Admiral had seen the opening Danny created. While they were distracted by their own chaos, she had gathered every ship that could still fight. They were not many. Barely 20 vessels remained operational, but they were attacking together, hitting the confused enemy with everything they had. The cavalry said with tears in her eyes. The human ships tore into the formation with desperate fury. They targeted the ships that were already damaged by friendly fire. They exploited the gaps where coordination had broken down. They fought like people who had nothing left to lose. Because they had nothing left to lose. They tried to respond, but they could not coordinate. Each ship fought alone, making individual decisions that often contradicted what their neighbors were doing. Some turned to face the new threat. Some continued pursuing the horizon. Some tried to protect the silent flagship. It was chaos, beautiful, wonderful chaos. One cruiser broke away from the pack chasing the horizon and turned to face a human frigate. 2 others followed its lead. Then 3 more. The hunt for the horizon was falling apart. Danny shouted, "I need engines, even a little." "I'm trying. The power couplings are, wait, I think I've got it." The lights on the bridge flickered. Then they steadied. Then the familiar hum of the engines returned, weak but present. "We have maneuvering thrusters," reported. "That's all I can give you right now, but we can move." It was not much speed, just enough to drift slowly through space, but it was better than sitting still and waiting to die. "Get us away from the main fight," Danny ordered. "Find some cover behind the debris." The horizon limped away from the battle. Around them, the remains of destroyed ships floated in the void. Human ships, all mixed together in a graveyard of metal and memory. Danny guided his wounded vessel through the wreckage. He watched the battle continue on his display. The human fleet was still outnumbered. They were still, but they were winning. How? Because they adapted. Because they worked together without needing orders. Because when one ship saw a weakness, it attacked without waiting for permission. They had spent decades studying human tactics. They knew how human fleets operated in normal conditions, but they had never seen humans fight like this. They had never seen humans with nothing to lose. On the flagship, Commander finally managed to establish a backup communication link. He screamed orders at his fleet, trying to restore coordination. But it was too late. The damage was done. The perfect machine of his fleet had shattered, and he could not put it back together in the middle of a battle. His officers looked at him with something he had never seen in eyes before: doubt. "What do we do, Commander?" one of them asked. Stared at the display. He watched his ships falling to enemy fire. He watched his numerical advantage meaning nothing against an enemy that refused to behave properly. For the first time in his life, he had no answer. And far away, drifting through the wreckage of battle, Danny Vance watched the tide begin to turn. "We did it," Tyler Grant whispered. "We actually did it." Danny put a hand on the young man's shoulder. "The battle's not over yet. We've still got work to do." But even as he said it, he knew the truth. They had lost control. and once you lost control of a battle, it was very hard to get it back. The humans were going to win. It seemed impossible. It was impossible, but it was happening anyway. One small ship had changed everything. Admiral Laura had commanded ships for 30 years. She had seen battles won and lost. She had watched brave people die and cowards survive. She thought she understood war. Today, she learned something new. She learned that sometimes impossible things happened. Sometimes, the side that should lose found a way to win. Sometimes, one crazy captain with one damaged ship could change the fate of thousands. All ships press the attack, she ordered through the fleet-wide channel. Don't give them time to regroup. Her remaining vessels obeyed with a fury that surprised even her. The captains did not wait for detailed orders. They saw opportunities and took them. They covered each other without being asked. They fought like a single organism with 20 separate bodies. They could not understand it. Their sensors showed them fighting a group of individual ships, but those ships moved together in ways that seemed to require communication. How were the humans coordinating without centralized commands? The answer was simple. They were not coordinating, they were trusting. Each human captain trusted the others to do the right thing. Each captain made decisions based on what they saw, knowing their allies would adapt. It was messy, it was unpredictable, and it was absolutely devastating to an enemy that needed perfect order to function. On the bridge of the damaged cruiser, Captain Maya Collins spotted a destroyer with damaged shields. She did not ask permission. She simply turned her ship and fired everything she had. The destroyer exploded in a ball of orange flame. Nearby, the frigate Reliance saw the exposed by its attack run. Without any communication, Captain Jake Burton moved his ship to cover Maya's flank. He intercepted two enemy fighters that were trying to take advantage of her vulnerability. They had never served together before. They did not know each other's names, but in that moment they were partners, protecting each other through instinct and shared purpose. This happened across the entire battlefield. Human ships finding each other, supporting each other, filling gaps before they became problems. It was not a tactic that could be taught in any academy. It was something deeper, something they had never encountered. Commander watched his fleet dying and could not understand why. He had more ships, he had better weapons, he had trained his entire life for war. How could he be losing to these primitives? Commander, one of his officers said hesitantly, several captains are requesting permission to retreat. Spun to face the officer with fury in his eyes. Retreat! We outnumber them. We are the Dominion. We do not retreat from lesser species. But the numbers on his display told a different story. He had started with 217 ships. Now he had less than 150 still fighting. 50 had been destroyed. The rest had been damaged or had lost formation entirely. The humans had started with 43 ships. They had lost 18, but their 25 remaining vessels were winning. Sir, another officer said, the humans are targeting our damaged ships. They're picking us off while we're disorganized. Saw it happening in real time. A cruiser with engine damage tried to reposition. Two human ships immediately pounced on it. The cruiser died before any friendly vessel could respond. This was not how war was supposed to work. In doctrine, superior numbers always won. Always. It was mathematical certainty. But mathematics had failed him today. While the main battle raged, the Horizon continued its slow drift through the debris field. Cole worked miracles in the engine room, bringing systems back online one by one. Life support was stable. Some weapons were functional. The shields were still down, but they were alive. Monroe coordinated repair teams with calm efficiency. She moved from crisis to crisis, solving problems and keeping people focused. Danny had never appreciated her more than he did today. Tyler Grant sat at his weapons console, ready to fire the moment any enemy came close. He had destroyed 7 fighters so far. Each kill made him more confident, more steady. The scared boy who had started this battle was becoming a warrior. And Danny watched everything from his command chair, feeling a strange mix of pride and exhaustion. "Captain," said, approaching him with a tablet in her hands, "Admiral is requesting a status update." Danny took the tablet and saw the Admiral's face on the screen. She looked as tired as he felt, but there was a light in her eyes that had not been there before. "Danny Vance," she said, "you magnificent idiot, what's your condition?" "We're alive, Admiral. Barely. Shields are down, engines are at 10%, and we're held together by duct tape and prayers." Laura laughed. It was not a polished Admiral's laugh. It was the raw, relieved laugh of someone who had thought she was going to die and suddenly realized she might not. "Can you make it back to the station?" Danny looked at his displays. The path was clear enough. They were too busy dealing with the human fleet to worry about one crippled destroyer. "We can try." "Then get moving. This battle's almost over." She was right. Danny could see it on the tactical display. The fleet was fragmenting. Ships were breaking formation and heading for the edge of the system, not in organized retreat but in panicked flight. They were running. The Dominion was running from humans. Danny turned to his crew. "You heard the Admiral, let's go home." The horizon limped toward station. As they moved, they passed the wreckage of the battle. Broken ships floated in the void. Some were still burning. Some had already gone cold and dark. Danny made himself look at every wreck. He owed them that much. Human and alike, every destroyed ship represented lives lost. The price of this day would take years to truly understand. But they had won. Against impossible odds, they had won. Behind them, the remaining ships began to activate their jump drives. One by one, they vanished from the system, fleeing to whatever safety they could find. Commander's flagship was among the last to leave. Laura watched them go and felt no joy, only relief, only exhaustion, only the weight of everyone she had lost. "Admiral," one of her officers said softly, "we've received confirmation. The enemy fleet has fully withdrawn. The battle is over." Laura closed her eyes. The battle was over. Station still stood. Humanity had survived. She opened her eyes and looked at the tiny blue dot on her display that represented the horizon. That one ship had made this possible. That one ship, with its crazy captain and its damaged hull, had changed everything. "Get medical teams ready," she ordered, "and prepare a hero's welcome for Captain Vance and his crew." Her officers hurried to obey. Laura allowed herself a small smile. Sometimes impossible things happened. The horizon reached station just as the last ship jumped away. Cole managed to keep the engines running until they were safely inside the docking bay. Then everything shut down at once, as if the ship itself had finally allowed itself to rest. Danny Vance stood on his bridge and looked at his crew. They were exhausted. Some were injured. All of them had faced death and survived. "You did good today," he said. His voice was hoarse. "All of you, I couldn't be prouder." Monroe smiled at him. Tyler Grant wiped tears from his eyes. Even Cole, appearing on the bridge for the first time since the battle began, managed a tired grin. They had done the impossible. And nothing would ever be the same again. 3 days after the battle, Danny Vance finally slept. For 72 hours, he had worked without rest. He had helped coordinate rescue operations. He had attended memorial services. He had answered questions from admirals, politicians, and reporters who wanted to understand how the impossible had happened. Now he lay in a small bed in station's medical wing, too tired to dream. Monroe sat beside him, watching him breathe. She had her own injuries, bruises and cuts from when the ship had been thrown around during the battle, but she refused to rest until she knew her captain was okay. Tyler Grant had visited earlier. The young officer was different now. The fear that had lived in his eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. He had proven himself in combat. He had faced death and done his job anyway. That changed a person. Cole was still working on the horizon. The ship needed massive repairs before it could fly again. Engineers from the station were helping, but insisted on overseeing everything personally. The horizon had saved them. He would save her in return. Outside the medical wing, Station was healing. The battle had caused tremendous damage. Whole sections of the station had lost power. The docking bays were filled with wounded ships. The morgue was filled with bodies that needed to be identified and sent home. But the station was still there. The people were still alive, and every day more help arrived from other human systems. Word of the battle had spread quickly through human space. The story of how 43 ships had defeated over 200 was already becoming legend, and at the center of that legend was the horizon. Admiral Laura entered the medical wing and found still sitting beside Danny's bed. "How is he?" she asked quietly. "Exhausted," replied, "but he'll be fine. He's too stubborn to be anything else." Laura smiled slightly. She had learned a lot about Danny Vance in the past few days. She had read his service record. She had spoken to his crew. She understood now why they followed him so faithfully. "When he wakes up," Laura said, "tell him I've made a decision about his court-martial." His face went pale. "Court-martial, but he saved us all." He also disobeyed direct orders, implemented an unauthorized protocol, and nearly got his entire crew killed. Stood up, her fists clenched. "Admiral, with respect, that's not fair. If he hadn't done what he did." Laura held up a hand to stop her. "I said I made a decision. I didn't say what it was." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a medal, the Star of Valor. It was the highest honor the human fleet could bestow. "I've decided to give him this instead," Laura said, "along with a promotion to Captain First Class and a letter of commendation that specifically mentions his creative interpretation of regulations." Stared at the medal, then at the Admiral, then back at the medal. Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me, thank him. He earned it." Laura placed the box on the table beside Danny's bed. "When he wakes up, tell him I expect him back on duty within a week. We have a lot of work to do." She turned and left the medical wing. There were meetings to attend, reports to file, and decisions to make about humanity's future relationship with the. That relationship was about to change dramatically. 6,000 light-years away, in the heart of space, the Council of Dominion was in crisis. Commander stood before the 7 ruling admirals and explained his defeat. He told them about the strange human tactics. He told them about the ship that had charged into their formation. He told them about the chaos that had followed. The admirals listened in grim silence. "You outnumbered them 5-1, Admiral said when finished. "You had technological superiority. You had the element of surprise, and you lost." "The humans did not fight according to their established patterns," replied. "They behaved unpredictably. Our tactical models could not account for." "Excuses," another admiral interrupted. "We have conquered 12 species. Not once have we failed, until now." The room fell silent. Every present understood what this defeat meant. It was not just a single battle lost. It was proof that their entire approach to warfare might be flawed. Admiral leaned forward. "Tell me, at any point during the battle did the humans surrender?" "No, Admiral." "Did they retreat when they should have?" "No, Admiral." "Did they behave in any way that suggested they knew they were supposed to lose?" Paused before answering. "No, Admiral. They fought as if victory was possible even when it clearly was not." Nodded slowly. This was the heart of the problem. The Dominion had built its empire on predictable enemies. Enemies who understood when they were beaten. Enemies who gave up when the math showed they could not win. Humans did not do math. Humans just kept fighting. "We face a choice," said to the Council. We can send a larger fleet to crush the humans, 10 times the size of the last one, 20 times. We have the ships, we have the resources. We could destroy them through sheer numbers. Then let us do so, an admiral said. But at what cost? Asked. How many ships will we lose? How many soldiers? And what happens when other species see us struggle against these humans? What happens when they realize that we can be beaten? The council considered this. The Dominion controlled a vast territory through fear. If that fear faded, rebellions would follow. What do you propose? Another admiral asked. Looked at each of them in turn. I propose that we do something we have never done before. I propose that we negotiate. The word hung in the air like poison. Did not negotiate, they conquered. Negotiate with humans, someone said with disgust. They are primitive, they are weak. They held station against 200 of our ships, replied. They may be primitive by our standards, but they are not weak. They are dangerous. And sometimes the wise choice is to accept a dangerous neighbor rather than create a determined enemy. The debate continued for hours. Some admirals wanted war, others saw the wisdom in words. In the end, a vote was taken. The council decided to negotiate. 6 months after the battle, a diplomatic vessel arrived at station. It was the first time in Dominion history that such a vessel had been sent to a non-conquered world. Danny Vance stood on the observation deck and watched the alien ship approach. Monroe stood beside him, along with Tyler, Grant, and Cole. Admiral had insisted they be present for this moment. Look at that, said quietly. 6 months ago they were trying to kill us, now they want to talk. That's what happens when you show people they can't push you around, replied. They start looking for other options. Danny said nothing. He just watched the ship and thought about everyone who had died to make this moment possible. 18 human vessels destroyed, thousands of lives lost. Each one of them had contributed to this victory, even if they were not here to see it. The treaty negotiations took 3 weeks. There were arguments and compromises and moments when it seemed like everything would fall apart. But in the end, an agreement was reached. The treaty of established boundaries between human and space. It guaranteed safe passage for civilian vessels. It created a framework for future communication and cooperation. It was not perfect, but it was peace. On the day the treaty was signed, Admiral gave a speech to the assembled crowds on station. She talked about courage and sacrifice. She talked about the people who had given their lives. She talked about the future that humanity had earned through blood and determination. And at the end of her speech, she said something that would be remembered for generations. Today, the universe learned an important lesson about humanity. We do not accept our place quietly. We do not surrender to those who wish to destroy us. We fight, we adapt, we survive, and we win. The crowd cheered. Danny Vance stood among them, feeling something he had not felt since before the battle, hope. They had come to conquer. They had found something else instead. They had found an enemy that did not know how to give up. An enemy that fought hardest when the odds were worst. An enemy that turned impossible situations into unlikely victories. They had found humanity. And humanity was not afraid. Years later, when historians wrote about the turning point in human relations, they always came back to the same story. The story of a single damaged ship that charged into an enemy fleet. The story of a captain who refused to accept defeat. The story of a crew who held together when everything was falling apart. They called it the miracle of. But Danny Vance never liked that name. Miracles were things that happened by chance. What happened that was not chance, it was choice. The choice to fight when fighting seemed foolish. The choice to hope when hope seemed gone. The choice to believe in his people when no one else did. That was not a miracle, that was just being human. And being human, Danny had learned, was enough.